Overreacting to spring training data is one of the most dangerous things you can do in fantasy baseball. However, I just spent 5 days in Arizona looking at spring training, so let's take a look at it, but with the lens through the data that we can see on StatCast to see who's having a breakout season. Here's some of my pictures from the trip, and I think live, the new ABS challenge system is one of the most exciting things you can have. Just to have a call overturned live is super exciting on the field, even though I know the umpires probably aren't super crazy about it. But if this is the type of data you like to get into the fantasy baseball inside the data to see what you can get an edge on your competition, this is the channel for you. So subscribe and follow and set your notifications. All right, so when you look under the surface and you sort the Major League spring training data by league leaders and home runs currently, you see an interesting name here pop up, Matt McLain, who has 4 home runs in just 6 games. And actually, I was present for 3 of the 4 home runs, 2 of them against the Brewers last Saturday and 1 against the Cubs last Monday. And he's looking very impressive, so I wanted to do kind of a deep dive with him at first to kind of see what's going on. So Matt McLain had a pretty disappointing regular season last year, batting only .220 with a .300 OBP and a .643 OPS. And you can see his spring training numbers are certainly better than that, but with certainly a very small sample size that is very dangerous to look at if you just look at it in the absolute. But his last year in 2025 was certainly below his career regular season averages, where he's usually a .734 OPS on average. But I think he's off to such a good start, and I'll show you the data behind it, that I think it's worth taking a look and monitoring him to see if he could pop up into that, maybe a starting second baseman rather than maybe a backup middle infielder option for your team. Now, it was only in the last month or so that I realized that Prospect Savant has all the spring training StatCast data. So when you look at it from Matt McLain here, you can see most of his numbers are really off the chart. He has an unbelievable weighted on base average. His ISO is fantastic. His exit velocities are looking very solid. Barrel rate, hard hit rate, like everything is where you'd want it to be seen. The only thing that's really below average in this case is his zone swing percentage. And I actually think that's a sign that he now has a plan this year. And you can see his zone contact rate is fantastic. So it really feels like he's being a little bit more selective and not just swinging at anything, but really waiting for his pitch. And when he can, he's really driving it. And it seems to be working for him so far. When you look at the other data that he has next on the spring training stats, you can see his spray chart here for his 4 home runs, and I was present for 3 of the 4, so they looked really solid even off the bat, with some slight opposite field Apotaco power here. When you look at the advanced stats under below, you can see that his BABIP is very solid. His ISO is fantastic, slugging percentage, his barrel rate, his launch angle is actually very solid. Towards kind of getting close to barrels if his exit velocity is up, because his hard hit rate is 62%. He's not chasing a whole lot and he's not whiffing a whole lot. So everything here looks really solid for a really hard, strong contact that kind of backs up the data you just saw in StatCast, and that's why he's producing at such a high level, even with just a small sample size worth of data. But the fact that everything looks really good, not just the numbers, it's also the underlying data between the StatCast suggests maybe he has a new plan, or he's been working the offseason on his swing and his pitch selection, and it's really materializing. So this is something to really keep track of looking forward. When you look at like NFBC and the current drafts for second baseman, you can see he's currently getting drafted way down number 13 overall for just second baseman eligibility, somewhere around 210 in the draft position. I would honestly think I'm really just seeing him in live, not looking at the StatCast data and really not trying to get too swayed by a small sample size. I easily put him ahead of Ozzie Albies right now, and I really think he probably slots in for me somewhere just behind Luke Keyshaw. You know how much I love Luke Keyshaw, so I wouldn't have him there. But I'm starting to really think you can move McLain up your board pretty well. And if you really miss out in the early rounds between Jazz and Ketel Marte, and you're just not happy with the second baseman options for a while, I think it's when you can kind of really wait and either get Luke Keyshaw or Matt McLain. You're probably very happy because you can spend the top parts of your draft going elsewhere, drafting outfielders, corner infielders, whatever the case may be, especially since second base is one of the weakest positions overall from a OPS standpoint, not just really the high end, but really overall to see how steeply it falls off cliff as you head down the rankings of the players. So I think this is someone where if you are not really going to prioritize second base early on in your drafts, if you really end up with Matt McLain on your team, I think your team will be just fine, and you can prioritize elsewhere to get some top players elsewhere. And now, if you look at kind of what's happening in NFBC drafts, you can see here he is, kind of flattening around, overall pick 200-ish or so, but you can see some people are starting to draft him really high, just above 100, and really another cluster here around, just below 125. So you can see some people are starting to read this data and potentially overreact to his positive spring training data and take a little bit earlier. So I expect to see in future updates from an FBC, he may jump up a bit more. But if your league hasn't caught on to this and doesn't really been watching how spring training is going, I think it is an opportunity for you to kind of slow walk the second baseman, get him later, and that can really boost your team. And so far he looks super solid, and Cincinnati is a fantastic place to hit. It's one of the top ballparks for hitters. So if he really is getting this kind of StatCast data and these exit velocities and can continue with it, I think he can really help your team and really do a great job. Second player we're going to look at is Jaren Duran. As a Sox fan, I really hope he does have a good year. There's so much talk about the Red Sox trying to move on from him and potentially trade him, as they have a pretty crowded outfield. However, he's doing really well this spring. You can see he has 3 home runs on that list. He was kind of that second tier of 3 home run hitters with a 583 average, 2.167 OPS. That really contrasts with his regular season last year, which was fairly in line with his overall career at a 774 OPS, 332 OBP. And I really think the 24 stolen bases, I really think that's a situation where the high expectations of what he can do. He's really kind of sitting in the probably just under 20, and then stolen bases, maybe 25 to 30 stolen bases you can hope for in his age 29 season. So he's definitely not going to be a top tier outfielder for you, but I think if he keeps hitting like this, he probably has some good upside for your team. Maybe as an outfielder number 4, if you ended up with him as your outfield number 4, that probably would not be a terrible thing if you're in a deep outfield fantasy league, but someone to keep an eye on. And again, let's take a look at his StatCast data from his spring training data so far. And again, everything looks real super solid. His weighted on base average, his ISO, even his exit velocities look pretty good. His barrel rates, really there's nothing that's below average. You can say maybe his chase rates could still improve. A walk rate looks solid, but there's nothing really here that calls out anything other than a really strong spring training, hitting the ball really well. And hopefully if this, keep an eye on this and this continues, this is someone you may want to grab or at least earmark him. Again, looking at kind of his spray chart distribution and some of the data under the hood, his launch angle is really, if you watch my video on launch angle and where there's that dead zone around 10 to 15 launch angle, I think that could still be improved for him. But his hard hit rate is solid, his chase rate's acceptable, and his average exit velocity is looking pretty solid so far. And so you can see he has a few home runs. That's why he is in the top half of home run leaders, plus some other doubles and so forth. So I think he's looking very solid in just 15 plate appearances. So I think this is someone that you can take a look at. Now, seeing where he's getting drafted as the number 15 outfielder, which actually put him a little bit higher, more like outfielder 3, and around pick 72. So I honestly believe, based on these, I don't know if I would necessarily move him up so much in my rankings, because that already seems like a pretty generous ranking for him. But to me, if you are in this area of your draft and he's the obvious choice ahead of you based on average draft position, I feel like this is a situation where it's like, okay, I would feel comfortable taking him where he's expected to be taking and hope for some upside there to be your return on investment. I certainly like him ahead of Riley Green, Randy Arozarena, so I wouldn't put him necessarily ahead of the potential of Roman Anthony or even James Wood or anything like that. So I think where he's currently getting ranked in the outfielders is pretty fair, but I feel a lot more confident about taking him if that's where he ended up to me in my drafts. And I think one thing that's also, I think, interesting is that he is also playing for Team Mexico in the World Baseball Classic. So I think having such a strong spring training and then going into this highly competitive environment of the World Baseball Classic, I'm interested to see if that can carry over into his regular season, where he's almost kind of been in that really peak playoff kind of competition mode. And that's something ongoing I want to really watch, like who competes in the World Baseball Classic and does it actually help them have a solid season, because you almost hit that regular playoff mentality super early on. And when you come back, do you carry that with you and potentially have a strong start to your season? That's something I'm very interested in seeing with some of these players. So the fact that he's getting a lot of playing time with Team Mexico, I think is fantastic. I'm not sure if they will advance too far in the World Baseball Classic, but the opportunity there for him to do that is, I think, much better than with Team USA. Now, when you look overall at how he's done across his career, this being his age 29 season, what's one interesting thing that you can see is that when you look at how he's done in spring training over the years, last year in spring training 2025, obviously it's small samples, so we don't want to, weigh too heavily, but he had an absolutely terrible spring training. His OPS was 569. His batting average was 196 with only one home run in just 17 games in the spring, and that kind of carried over into his average. His last year, he had just that 774 OPS. After a couple years above 800, he kind of dipped down there. He only had 16 home runs to go with 24 steals, coming off of previous season in 2024 was at least a 20, almost 35 guy with 342 on base percentage and 834 OPS. So I feel like if I was looking at what my expectations for him would be, my expectations based on the strong spring that I've seen in some of the data is hopefully he gets back to that 2024 type of data and not really repeating what he did in 2025. And I think that'll be a fantastic outcome based on where he's getting drafted currently and if you have him on your team in those spots. Next player we're going to talk about in this one is actually very interesting because when you look at the data and you say, okay, we've got, Matt McLain up here and we've got, Jaren Duran, who else is also having a pretty solid spring that kind of surprises me. And the name that popped out here is Charlie Condon of the Colorado Rockies. He also has 3 home runs, so he's one of the top home run hitters so far early in the spring. When you look at his data in StatCast for spring training, you can see some things look excellent. Max exit velocity, of course, that's kind of a calling card for him. 90th percentile exit velocity looks good. His barrel rate looks amazing. And everything else is kind of, in the middle, but at least, his whiff rate's a little high. Strikeout rate's not terrible for the spring compared to him, and that's really been kind of the issue with him. As we'll go through some of the other data through the minors, is this is someone who has all the power that you want in the world, and obviously marrying that with playing in Colorado could be absolutely monstrous for fantasy baseball. But he's had too much of a strikeout concern. So I think he's showing, pretty good chase rate and keeping it down to 20%. And then his contact can always be improved, but a 78% contact rate in the zone is not terrible for him. Probably an improvement where he's been, but this is someone I've kept an eye on because when you look at the other players like who were drafted with him, he was one of those big 3 power hitters with Kurtz and Caglianone, and the other 2 look to be huge pieces of their teams going into the season. And Condon's really not in that kind of conversation for Colorado, who certainly could use any talent they can get, especially with a lot of power for that ballpark. And I think he's starting to show signs that he might be coming on, and hopefully it gives us an opportunity if he keeps us up to see him in the majors this year. Looking at his spring training stats, and just 15 at bats, 19 plate appearances, he's hit 3 home runs. His ISO is fantastic. His weighted on base average, his average exit velocity is good. Barrels, hard hit rates, only 38.5%. He could probably do a little bit better with that. And his chase rate's still 20%. But I think these are solid things for him to build on it. I think it's, especially with, people say obviously the pitching is not perfect in the spring training because some pitchers are just building up and getting their speed up. Some pitchers are gone to the World Baseball Classic. But I would say based on his performance in the minor leagues the last couple of years, seeing any signs of improvement against people at least in consideration for major league play in spring training is a positive sign for him. Especially since when you look at, as I mentioned, it's when you look back at the draft for 2024, you can see Travis Bazzana went number 1, but Condon 2, Caglianone 3, and Nick Kurtz 7. So those 3 are kind of the big power bats kind of traveling together from that draft. And that's how they're ranked by Major League Baseball prospect pipeline in the actual draft from the Major League Baseball that year. Condon went number 3 overall to Colorado, Kurtz 4, and Caglianone 6 to Kansas City. So that's where they were drafted. He got a nice healthy bonus of $9.25 million for being drafted 3rd overall. So again, he was drafted number 1 of those 3 hitters. So Colorado had their choice of Nick Kurtz or Caglianone, and they took Condon. And even in the rankings after the fact of the draft, he was rated higher than those players or ranked higher, but the other 2 have flown through the minors a lot faster than he has, and they're already contributing to their teams. So I really wonder if Colorado thinks they made the right decision, but hopefully they're getting the returns, even if it's just a little bit slower with him on this year. So when you start to look overall at the stats between Kurtz from Oakland, you can see, he he flew through the minors relatively in 2024. He made it to Double A. 2025. Briefly he was in Triple A most of the year, and of course came up to the majors last year to play 117 games in the majors. So, and he really kind of produced and had a great WRC plus in each of those stops. So that's why he just kind of flew through, and that's why he's in the majors producing. Even Caglianone, a little bit slower, but once he got to 2025, starting in Double A, his WRC plus was 158, 186 as he got to Triple A, and of course, at the end of last year, he did get some time in the majors, even though he struggled a little bit. But I think they're very excited. They have him in their plans for this year. But when you look at Condon, 2024, his WRC plus was terrible, 41. He had a 180 average, 243 OBP, over 35% strikeout rates. I think that was a concern. And then some of the power was gone as ISO. He just wasn't really connecting with the ball. And that's why he started really in 2025. He spent a lot of time in high A and then made it to Double A last year, and that's kind of where he's stopped at the moment. He improved a little bit. He got his WRC plus into the 130s, got his strikeout rates below 30%. I think that's where they're hopeful he can make further improvements. But you can see, compared to how he's been doing to even start out the spring training with a 10% walk rate, almost 16% strikeout rate, is fantastic for him. So I think the question is going to be, can he keep this up? Because strikeouts are always going to be part of his game, but can he hit enough and hit for power that will make up for it and make it worth rostering? And I think he's on his way to proving that he can do that. Next name that popped out is really an almost interesting one. It's almost I would say, the story that I mentioned falling just for the individuals involved, and that is Brennen Davis. So if you see, Brennen Davis has also hit 3 home runs here. So if you remember Brennen Davis, you've been in the prospect area for a while. You can remember back in 2018, he was taken in the second round by the Chicago Cubs and signed for just over $1 million. And even as recently as 2022, he was the number 1 prospect for the Chicago Cubs in the outfield. However, things haven't gone his way, and he had a lot of back injuries and stuff like that. And even last year, the Cubs ended up just cutting him. And now and then last year he was with the Yankees, and now he's popped up with Seattle, which is actually, I think, kind of exciting because Seattle does need a lot of offense, and if he can really make it, he's 26 years old now, so this would be a feel-good story. I think you can have someone who was drafted a long time ago, really struggled in the minors, especially with injuries and even being available to play, and hopefully he can make it to the majors and start producing for Seattle, which I know they would love to have that. That's why you can see here on the left, you can see he never played more than 100 games of professional baseball in any of the stops. The closest he got was in 2021, where he played 99 games. But you can see, 24 and 25, both around 55 and 50 games. So those are the concerns with him. And he had some struggles where his OPS was down around 600 for a couple years. And that's kind of the point where the Cubs kind of started to give up on him. However, last year he did, small sample size of 50 games, his OPS was over 900. And I think that's why Seattle's taking a chance on him. And when you look at the data from the StatCast for spring training, it is absolutely fantastic here at the top half. So everything you hope for with this guy, strong ISO, exit velocities, barrel rate, hard hit rate, even pull air percentage is all looking really good. And now there's still some work to do here down at the bottom. Strikeout rate, pretty average, so nothing super concerning I can see here. You want his zone contact rate to be pretty close there. I think lowering his chase rate would help and be a little bit more selective of his pitches. But this is someone who I think has the potential, because if he really does start to hit, I think there's an opportunity for him in Seattle, especially if they want to make a playoff push. So this is a name I would put on your watch list and see if there's a notification that he gets called up. I think this is someone you may want to jump on and really roster on the end of your bench just to see if you can get, someone with some strong power to your team. And I think it's a feel-good story, and I'd be rooting for him as an individual throughout this entire year. So when you look underneath the hood of his spring training stats, you can see his average exit velocity is 95, launch angle is a solid 21, hard hit rate's 71%, chase rate's a little bit high, 25, but that's okay. He should probably try to work on that. But his spray chart's looking pretty solid with a couple home runs already. So I think this is a profile of someone who I think has an opportunity, kind of a combination of the feel-good story of someone who took a long, windy road with injuries, potentially get to the majors, and then the marriage or the fit with Seattle, who needs some talent to come up and help them make a push for the playoffs. Could be an exciting storyline for this year to follow. And then I just want to have one more thing on the end here, as I mentioned, hanging around here. So Konnor Griffin, there's some tweets now starting to go around saying that as things stand right now, he will start the season at AAA, citing his 214 Grapefruit League average. But I think what really, when you look at this, is when you look at the data under the hood, yes, you can point to that and say, oh, he only batted 214. That's almost going the opposite way with the stats. We certainly want to be cautious with spring training stats and not fall in love with huge numbers. So take all this with a grain of salt there. But I think seeing the stats underneath it gives you some confidence, at least, that there's some improvements with some of these players. But this is almost going the exact opposite direction. Where yes, it is a fact that he's only hitting 214 so far in spring training, and of course on paper, if you're dealing with the 1980s, that's where someone would send you down the major and say, get that up, a little bit higher. But if you look at his StatCast data and what he's known for, all these things again here at the top, other than maybe his average exit velocity, which signals maybe some maybe high ground ball contact, but all the max exit velocities, 90th percentile, 50th percentile, they're all fantastic. 95th percentile on average, hard hit rates sufficient. His strikeout rates decently 13%. He could certainly walk more and chase less, but I think that's true for any young guy trying to prove themselves. So when you look at his spring training data, he has 3 home runs. So even though, yes, his average is factually 214 and his OBP is only 267, but his slugging percentage is 857 because of those 3 home runs. So his OPS is over 1,000 and his ISO is over 600 and his WOBA is 447. So it's really, to me, he's got all the tools on the hard hits, almost the consistency on the bottom half here. And so this is when I would just give him more time to learn and make adjustments. His launch angle is a little bit low, so I think there is probably some too many ground balls in there, but in too much chase where he's not getting his right pitches. But this is almost when I think you give him time to learn on the spot. So if you are in a redraft league and there was a lot of attention where how far up drafts he could pop if he gets the call that he's for sure making the team, now that it's looking like they may not make the team, I think there's an opportunity here for people to get him a little bit later in their drafts or stash him on their bench, what the case might be. But because if the word is out that he may not start with the team, people are going to be wondering if they really just wait till Super 2 deadlines and so forth. But to me, the data under the hood here says he's hitting the ball hard enough. He just needs to be a little bit more selective about his chase rate and not swinging outside the zone. That I think the data is still super solid, so I'm still as optimistic about him as ever. And so I think there's an opportunity here to get him possibly at a better value or a little bit easier in your league than had he been stated as going to be a guaranteed starter on opening day for the team. So to me, this is something to keep an eye on, because I think this creates a little bit of opportunity for a little bit of return on investment for people who look beyond just the number of the 214 batting average and see what's going on in his StatCast data and say he still looks super solid. So I'm sure I've high confidence that if they stick him down in AAA, he's going to start mashing right away, and then they'll be under pressure to call him up as soon as possible. So now, if you like this type of stuff and you want to go deep on prospects, you should subscribe to this channel, turn on your notifications, and check out the video, the one around here in the corner, because I think this is the next one you may want to see.